Welcome to Cancer and Peace. My name is Sean Stewart, and I'm facilitating a conversation with our host today, Peter Scalzo. We're back for another episode. Peter and I just came off of a really nice 4-day kind of weekend retreat that we interacted on together, and it was good. It was really good, I thought, and I know that we learned a bit. And on the back side of it, there was a lot of discussion about a term we're going to use, and we were talking about. I won't use the term yet. I'll introduce it in a second. But we were talking about this is how to deal with doubt. And I thought, yeah, this is good because all of us, we get on our journeys and we know that we are narrative-based individuals, that we live on, our lives are based upon a narrative. The narrative is the story you live your life by. And so all of us are following a story, something we believe about the world and the people around us and everything that's going on. And what creeps in is doubt, is doubt about the story. And is this story the same story I thought I was living in? And so it's hard sometimes to get yourself in alignment. And the thing that we were challenged with, and I think all of us experience, and here's the term, it's called tapping out. So as things get difficult, the temptation to tap out. And so we wanted to talk about this for people who are in a cancer journey. And our focus was not so much about tapping out on a cancer journey, because if you do that, I think you're basically just saying, hey, accept my death sentence, I guess, in some way. I'm just going to let things get worse. But our focus was really thinking about your inner person, is tapping out in your inner person, in your journey towards meaning and hope and so forth. And so I was going to kick it over to Peter and just him think about some examples for where he's been tempted, or he maybe even did tap out in your cancer journey. And then we would just talk a bit about tools and what it's looked like in our lives and just see where this goes.
Yeah. Thanks, Sean. Great build up. Wonderful weekend. Loved it. And I think that as a man of faith going through this cancer journey, certainly I look to God and Jesus, the major part of what I do every day, especially as I analyze and go through my cancer journey. So I was talking with another fella at the retreat, and we were talking about what does tapping out mean? And I thought, well, there's the big tapping out, which is for me would be, hey, God, I don't believe in you anymore, and I'm going to walk away from you, and I'm going to walk away from other relationships and all that. That would be like a major tapping out. But you and I were just talking about during the break, a mini tapping out. And certainly I experienced that this past year, and I think as I look back, it was a difficult medical year in that I didn't feel well. I had my typical treatments and procedures and tests and scans and all that, but I had a lot of kidney issues. My kidneys are in a chronic kidney disease phase, and they're my kidney numbers were going up and down, and I was experiencing a lot of fatigue, not feeling well, and sort of at that place of what I would say pain, failure, and disappointment. Just, hey, what's happening? This is my 18th year. I'm tired of this. And I found myself saying, even struggling talking to God about it, saying, you know what, I just don't feel like doing this anymore. And I don't feel like talking to God about it anymore. And so my escape was watching a lot more Netflix series, running to some coping mechanisms that ones that I run to, not just nice diversions that really are fine and healthy, but actually becoming immersed in some coping mechanisms, which was more of an escape than me kind of dealing with, okay, am I going to settle this question? Am I going to really sort of get back to brass tacks of what's really going on within me? And I'm still, this past year I did recovery, a lot of inner journey work, but still had that issue with sort of like, I don't think I can do this anymore right now. I just need a break.
It's interesting because you're facing something, though, that's real. Let me set up the story. Then one of the things that I thought was a great example of this because they use a lot of movie clips over the weekend, and
Yeah.
probably most of the people that when I refer to Braveheart will have seen Braveheart, and so they'll connect with this clip, and it's in the opening part of the movie, and the two lines of soldiers are gathered kind of over a valley area, and you have all the Scottish, kind of ragtag guys are all lined up, and the English army is lined up with all their resources and horses and weaponry on the other side, and it's an overwhelming force, look of force, and you see the conversations of people that are in the forces that are ragtag, and they're like, let me just throw down my hoe and just walk out. And they start doing that. They're like, hey, we're walking away. And that's tapping out. Mm-hmm. Because there's a thing where something that looks overwhelming in their darkest moment, but it's avoiding something that in the story that is important. Mm-hmm. And so I think the encouragement right now is when you're in that place where you feel like tapping out, what is the thing that you're avoiding in the story, the pain that maybe you can numb it for a little while. And so just like these soldiers could say, hey, I'm not going to fight this fight today. And one of the great things that William Wallace said was, yeah, but if you go out a generation from now and you choose not to face this today, are you going to look back in time with this one moment for an opportunity to go through something hard and recognize you gave up the greatest meaning in your life?
Yeah.
Was basically the story, and summarizing it, a lot more there. And so, and so I'm going to go back to you in that space. Hey,
so
what's
I get that.
Yeah.
I get that because let's say you're a soldier standing there and you're looking at this unbelievable force before you, and you have this guy, William Wallace, who's larger than life, saying that phrase. I would think, I think this guy's right. Like, I don't want to be 20 years from now on my front porch in my rocking chair saying, man, wish I had done the fight, because, we could have had freedom. This nation could have been free, And I think for me, it's dealing with the threat of recurrence. It's dealing with a future with being sick, and not sort of, because I didn't feel well, and I thought, well, maybe this is a recurrence, and I thought, I just don't want to deal with that right now. And I think the courageous thing for me to have done would be to sit down with my higher power, Jesus Christ, and say, okay, what's going on? What am I afraid of? And what's your purpose and plan in this? What's your passion in this? And another word that resonated with me, which I think fits here from this past weekend, is I'm going to consecrate this journey to you, give it over.
We're back to purpose for a few minutes, and that's good. And I think we should talk about consecration as a tool in a bit. But I think this idea of purpose is such an important part, because I mentioned, in the lead up to this, is that we're narrative based creatures, and so we live our lives based on a narrative that we believe is actually taking place. And so, if we take the Braveheart example, you have a situation where a certain set of people that are standing in that line are under the belief that this is pointless, and they're going to die for a pointless reason and just feel suffering and pain. And why not just throw things down and go back and find some level of comfort in the immediate, at least, even knowing that it's going to have long-term oppression in pointlessness. And I think this is super important for a cancer patient, because it's, if you don't understand that there's a purpose in your journey, in your cancer journey, and your suffering, you may not be able to put your finger on exactly what it's going to look like or what the battle is, but this is not pointless. And spending time to really understand purpose is such a big part of that. Does that resonate with you?
Yes. And I know when I was in that place of, Lord, what do I do with the fact that I'm tempted to tap out? What came back to my mind was, and my heart was, Peter, I have such a strong purpose and plan in this. You have allowed me to speak in you and through you through this journey to yourself, your family, and other people, and I am working out my purpose and plan through you. And the other thing is, what are you scared of? And it's like, well, Lord, I don't want to do an end of life process, leading up to death. And it's like, but Peter, I've done all these other journeys with you. I'm going to be as present with you in that as I have been in all your life. And it's like, yeah, Lord, I don't need to be afraid of that. You will comfort me, give me peace, and be my God through that process also.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't need to escape this. And, I think about my kids, those people who, let's say, look up to me, including myself. I don't want to disappoint myself and my kids and other folks. I want to walk in what God has for me, even if it's hard.
Yeah, there's great joy in doing journeys through hard things.
Yeah.
And I think the message, there's this concepts, and it's always darkest right before the dawn. And so if you don't walk through the difficulty, and if you tap out, you'll never get to see the dawn.
Mm-hmm.
If you tap out, you miss the dawn. And we don't always know what the dawn's going to look like. We don't know what's going to come in the coming day. But there's something really important about walking through. We know, I think, from our own journeys that our greatest learnings are in those darkest periods. The dark night of the soul. We've talked about the dark night of the soul and in great struggle. And so I think our encouragement is to recognize this for what it is that this narrative is, I think, a voice from evil asking you to tap out on what is the best. And it's so hard for us so many times to see it, though. And so we have to have people around us who have an idea what's going on. And you said, though, that consecration word, and I think this is really big, is stop trying to control. And does that resonate with you? And maybe what does it look like? Because I think so much of the time is that we want to control the journey, and we're just being asked to wade into this journey.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure that resonates. I think about those mornings that I get up and I don't feel like doing my spiritual practices. I want to say life sucks. And I want to just walk away from those things I know to be healthy and spiritual and good for me, and just grab a glass of wine, not in the morning.
Let's hope not, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
But just escape and numb it just a little bit and sort of walk away. And I think that that concept of I'm going to consecrate this, even, God, you have something bigger for me. You have something that's huge, and I don't know what it is right now. I really don't. But I'm gonna do the next right thing, even if it hurts. I'm gonna do the next right thing. I'm not this guy that does that all the time, but I think I do that enough where I could say, I know it works when I do the next right thing.
Yeah, I would say that I'm just thinking about these concepts a little bit as we're talking, and one of the things that seems important to me is part of consecration is also feeling. And so being able to feel those things that God has given us for feelings.
Right.
And it can be the feeling suffering and walking through that suffering and that pain is part of the journey to consecration, because you're learning to trust God in the pain and in the suffering. I think that's a big part of what you're talking about. But consecration, the word, I think, means giving it to a higher power. And for us, it's giving it to the Lord, giving it to Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. Consecration is I'm giving this journey to you for whatever outcome that you want it to be. And that's why I say it's a journey of letting go of control. It's like I can try to control it. And most of the time my control is actually just trying to control the pain. And so that's why when you talk about coping mechanisms, it's a form of control, but it's controlling the pain. And so the opposite of that is feeling the pain, letting the pain speak to you and tell you what's going on. And it's not about masochism in a sense of like trying to find pleasure in pain, so to speak. That's not the point. It's trying to find meaning in the midst of the pain and the suffering.
I think for me, it's I discovered this past year that I have a lot of trauma from my cancer journey. I didn't know it until this past year, and how it manifested itself was not wanting to go, tapping out, not wanting to go to the next medical appointment. Almost an unwillingness, almost like a panic attack to get into my car to go to the next medical appointment. And so I know that I couldn't interact with the pain at that point, but what I did was trauma exercises. And you know what some of those are.
Yep.
To sort of get my nervous system and my, whatever is going on in my body, to get that aligned enough to where I can actually say, okay, let's really talk about this thing and let's analyze it, and let's feel the pain, and let's learn from it. But there were times this past year where I was dealing with trauma, and I had to do that hurdle first, and then I could deal with the other things. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, and I want to turn that a little bit now, because you and I had a good conversation before we started recording, and it was about understanding that a big part of this tapping out is, you and I were talking about a friend of ours who is in a wheelchair, and you were like, hey, we spend a lot of time talking about the physical, but maybe the big William Wallace Bravehearts are actually the people who are in wheelchairs, or because we were thinking of an example, but also people who are struggling, who are at a really weak place in their cancer journey, where maybe they've done chemo for a long period of time and their body has just been so weakened. But I want to talk about something that I think is really important here, and that's something that we believe in Christian realms, and that is that you don't wrestle with flesh and blood, but you wrestle with principalities and powers. And for any one of us, I know that looks different than what you might expect, but that voice in your head who's telling you it just doesn't matter, why bother, or you're not enough, or that you're not valuable, or maybe you're just stupid, or you're an idiot, or any of these things that come along. This is spiritual warfare. And I think it's such an important thing to understand that what happened to Eve in the garden was spiritual warfare. And spiritual warfare looks like something coming along, a spiritual power, principality, who tries to give you a false narrative. And that's what happened to Eve in the garden, is Satan came along represented by the snake in this. So you can view the story however you like, but let's just think of it metaphorically for a second. A evil creature came and told a story that wasn't the right story. It had a lot of truth connected to it, but it was stuffed with a really big lie. And that is that if you do this here, your life's going to be so much better, or it's going to be easier, or you're going to be, in her case, you're going to be as smart and as wise as God. And that was the lie. And our entire lives are driven along by this very same thing. It's like the idea of tapping out is to hear a story that comes from a spiritual force that wants to have you living a false narrative.
Yeah.
And that's such a critical point in your life, is if you listen to that, you can see that it brings you to a really terrible place.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure you've experienced that. And so how do you combat that? How do you...
Yeah, the narrative was, this is a losing cause, and there's no meaning and purpose in this.
Yeah.
This is just cancer, and it's going to end up in your death. And all will have been lost.
Yes.
Right? And the talk, okay, that's what I'm hearing right now. But I like to actually say out loud, this is a winning cause. God is on my side. There's a tremendous purpose and passion and plan in this. And I have passion over it, but it's that God can embrace me in even a cancer journey, and his power is perfected in my weakness. Wonderful plan and purpose in that. And that whatever happens, he will be with me in force, and he will make his presence known in whatever happens. So I think it's definitely like I'm more sensitive now to those sayings that are like from the enemy. I'm more sensitive to that. Almost like I'm a loser, that I'm stupid, those kinds of statements that we do with self-talk. And I'm more sensitive to that. Hold on. I remember one of them that I did this past year, and it was, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
That was one this past year. And then what came into my mind immediately was, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And when Paul uttered that, he was in a place of suffering.
Yes, that's so good. Like
That's the truth, not that I can't do this anymore. Yes, that might be that I can't, but Christ can do this in me and through me, and I can do all things through him.
yes, if you have a voice in your head that's
Yeah.
saying, I can't,
Yes.
it's too much, if it's a derogatory word about yourself.
Yeah.
And I found from my own journey that I was saying derogatory words in my head about myself. So anytime things didn't go right, I would say something that that came from words that I got from my parents. You idiot. And so I found myself calling myself an idiot all the time. And then once I recognized that wasn't the voice of reason, that was it's like a spiritual warfare. It's a negative voice, and it wasn't true. And so repeating those negative voices will tend to have you living the narrative of that. And I love about your story is that you were kind of in that place where, as you came out of your hardest surgery, of I can't go forward.
Right.
There was a call, an ask for you to tap out. I don't want to go forward. I don't want to live anymore.
Right.
I've had enough.
Right.
And what I remember about your story is that the journey out
Yeah.
was journaling down all the things that were happening and journaling the truths.
Right.
And so that means that you reorientated your narrative to what was true.
And you pointed out to me, which I never thought about. You may not remember this, but I thought I had completely tapped out. Yet in my journal, one of the entries was, "Where are you, God?" In other words, you said to me, Peter, you're still acting under faith to even call out to God. Where are you? So, yes, tapping out, yes, but not abandoning God, just so distraught. But yes, then replacing lies with truth.
Yeah, asking questions is not tapping out. And I think even your body wanting to tap out is not tapping out. Mm-hmm. And in my own experience, I've tapped out here in our ministry before. And I tapped out because I had a false narrative about what, and the narrative was about me needing to control where we were going, and God had different plans for where we were going. And so I tapped out, and it took an act of God to get me to come back and be a part of what was happening there.
What did that look like?
Well, it looked like, I got into a lot of arguments with our board, and they were going, hey, we need to go this direction. And I was like, I'm not a part of this. We're going this direction. And I wasn't willing to embrace the gift of limits, that the board was a limit over the ministry. And it was hard because the finances weren't good. Things were just right. And so rather than go through the hardship of working on reconciling where I was at, where they were at, and the difficulty of the finances and all the things that were happening, I just said, I'm tapping out. I'm done. And what happened was the former director came back, and we our team prayed here. Our team took time, and I remember one of the younger team members came and was like, "Hey, Sean, you need to know something." And she had a really great spiritual connection with her. And he's like, she said her and her dad had been praying, and she's like, "You were ordained to be here, and it's not time for you to leave yet." Mm. And that was the exact same message that the former director says, like, "Hey, I don't think it's your time to go yet. You need to." And so once I recognized that I was trying to step in and control, and I didn't want to go through the difficulty, and I recognized that. And I remember one of our good friends also said this. He was like, "Sean, you'll be here as long as God wants you to be."
Yeah.
And so it really was this moment of recognizing I was trying to impose my will over God's, and I didn't want to go through the hard wrestling of the difficulties that were happening here. And it just looked too big. The problems looked too big. But after I got to that recognition, I finally just submitted my will in that space. And I went back and apologized for my part in that. And we slowly started the restoration process. And that was where we got into, that was getting into recovery at that point in time, just a little bit after that. And what brought real healing was a few years later when, after going through recovery, I recognized how much of a control freak I was. And I needed to let go of that and trust God with that. And so I was able to apologize to the board with understanding who I was and what was driving my inner person, my need to tap out and need to control. And so that journey was hard and was painful. But man, there was so much meaning, and I couldn't even see a way how we would even work through it at the time. But God put these pieces together, and He brought the right people in to speak, to my heart and to what was going on at the right times, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And so I think your journeys in the cancer space is also, you talk about John coming and putting that journal on your chest at the right time, asking you, hey. He didn't actually even know what you're supposed to do with it. He just put it on your chest, and he was doing that as an act of obedience of God.
Yeah.
And you started using truth to and that reorientated your narrative. Yeah. And here you are years later, sharing your journey story, and that's because there's purpose.
And one other side issue with this too is doubting, and I think most of the time doubting is normal and natural. It's all through Scripture. I mean. Yeah. One example that I used this past weekend was John the Baptist imprisoned, and he had baptized Jesus and knew who he was. And yet when some of Jesus' disciples came to him, he said, "Is this the one?" He was doubting and questioning.
Yes.
Is this the one? And
that is not tapping out. That is asking questions.
Yes. Yeah. So I think doubting can be a normal part of working into and through purpose and God's plan for it,
I think when you think about doubt, Jesus didn't attack doubting Thomas either. He actually showed him his hands and his side. Yeah. So it's okay to ask the question, and doubts, there are levels of understanding that we each have. But it's when we begin to act on our doubts without examining is when we move into tapping out. And tapping out is where we move into living a lie, because now we begin living a false narrative. And we're called to walk through the suffering, walk through the battles, to be warriors, to be I like this idea of being in the arena. Yeah. And it's easy to stand outside the arena and hurl all kinds of words and even insults or whatever from the stands. But I think everybody who's listening to this podcast, who's going through a cancer journey, my word is you're in the arena.
Yeah.
And, you can shrivel up and fall on the ground and wait for the lions to eat you, or you can just go for the journey, whatever that looks like, and not tap out and see what God does with a mustard seed of faith, of just trusting and walking with Him.
Yeah.
And your life is an example of that, Peter. And I think there's a bunch of testimonies we've had come through here who also represent that. So our encouragement is to, when you feel a desire to tap out, start asking yourself some questions. Where is it coming from? What's real? And I love where you started examining what's true and reorientate your heart, what's going on in your life, and then follow that which is true.
Yeah, and I think for us of faith, we always talk about having a higher power and spiritual life. And Christianity, the scriptures do present that there's a spiritual world, like you were talking about, and powers and principalities of darkness. So one of the things for me is, what's being thrown at me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to recognize that there's spiritual warfare going on. I mean, we're at a time we were dropped into this, I love this love story.
Yeah.
God has a love story since creation, and he's going to culminate that love story. And we're in, what was it, Act 3 or something? We're in
the fight part, yes,
yeah.
or the darkest part before.
The battle, like the final battle kind of thing. And we're dropped in. And so we're in warfare, but it's still a love story.
And cancer is the warfare in this case, the people that are in this journey.
Excuse me. Yeah.
But you're right, it's still a love story.
Yeah.
And if you can love in the middle of the battle,
yeah,
and live out your love story, even, I really liked this idea as the greatest soldiers weren't the ones who were motivated by hating what's in front of them.
Yeah.
The greatest soldiers were motivated by loving what's behind them.
Yeah.
And I think that's the cancer journey. It's like, it's not about, staying in to hate something in front of you. It's around you, behind you is probably a family and close friends and a community that you've been set in that you can love with such a deep love that your life can be motivated in this great love story. It may be a spouse, it may be your kids, it can be a whole range of people around you, but that's the real story.
I'm going to say this to cancer patients, that this life is temporary. This life is short. Scripture says this life is a vapor, and there's all eternity. And I won't have cancer forever. I will be healed. And so the Braveheart message is that there is a great purpose and plan in your diagnosis and in your treatment and what you are going through, and there's a greater purpose and plan. So remain steadfast. I was looking at the Psalms, and it was talking about giving me a steadfast spirit. So that concept of endurance, hanging in, staying in the fight, all that stuff is really, really wonderful for the fact that we have a loving God who's in charge.
And do that in a community with others.
Yes.
And you're going to experience joy even in the suffering.
Yep.
Well, we're getting close to the end here. We're going to have to wrap up. Sean. But I definitely think that I really found this to be a powerful concept. And there's so many times I've been tempted to tap out, and I know you have too. And I'm going to bet anybody who's listening can relate to, the overwhelming forces at times that are out there. And our encouragement is go through the battle and see what God does on the other side. And Amen. So thanks for listening, everyone. You can get more resources at cancerandpeace.com. You can get Peter's book and those other resources that we've shared here. We did some Wild at Heart retreating with some of the resources there. So there's links to go different places where you'll find all kinds of good stuff. So check it out, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you.